Welcome, everyone. It's another season, another production of Swan Lake. No, I hope you all are doing well. I welcome to Cinematic Realms. I'm your host, John Webster, and with me, as always, is Jared Kozel. How are you doing, Jared?
I'm doing all right. This movie always puts you in an interesting headspace. And for me, I woke up this morning, I watched my Premier League team lose, then I watched my NFL team lose. So I was in some dark feels, but this movie it's appropriate for the embracing the darkness, shall one say. But it is also just an amazing piece of artistry in and of itself. So it'll lift me up to take that dive into the darkness and lose myself in its beauty over the course of this discussion.
Yep. For those who don't know, today we're talking about the 2010 Darren Aronofsky film Black Swan, and I did watch it last night because it felt weird to imagine myself watching it during the daytime, and I felt like I needed to watch it when like all the lights were off, and I could be thoroughly freaked out. But no, I love this movie dearly. And it got me thinking about when I went to go see it. It was so funny because, like, sometimes you set yourself up for situations that you should anticipate are going to be awkward, but then you just forget to prepare for that. And one such occurrence happened for me because I went to this movie with my movie buddy, otherwise known as my mom. And nothing at all awkward in this. I do recall that we had a conversation after we came out of the movie, and I don't know how the conversation steered around to the scene, but everybody knows what I'm referencing. And she was, I think she said something to the effect of, actually, I don't remember exactly what she said, but the gist of it was me sheepishly going, "Yep, didn't mind that scene at all." And her and I had a chuckle over it. Yeah, it's funny. I went to go see some, like, especially I feel like my mom and I had a turn in our sort of movie going rituals after I introduced her to Kill Bill in 2003, and after that we just went together to, no matter how weird the movie was or whatever, we always had a fun time. Although the one exception is I did not take her with me to go see A Dangerous Method. I had the foresight not to go there.
That seemed wise.
Yeah. But anyway, getting back to the conversation about the movie, what were the circumstances of when you saw this movie? Did you see it in theaters?
I did not see it in theaters. I saw it very shortly before the Oscars came out. I think it had just been on. There was a way I was watching it on home video at that point, but I had been looking forward to it from the moment it premiered because, as has been well established, I have an enduring affection for Natalie Portman, stemming particularly from her role in the Star Wars prequels. But also I had, really come to appreciate that, she was more than just Padme Amidala. She was, becoming a burgeoning artist in her own right. And this was a role that kind of unlike any that she had ever taken on before. And the trailer, what is certainly an evocative trailer. It spells out the fact that Our dear Nina Sayers may perhaps be in the process of losing her grip on reality. And while would not necessarily have gravitated towards a movie about ballet dancers, I was more than down to watch Natalie Portman lose herself in the midst of a psychological thriller, which is a genre that I always do appreciate. Even if I am not always the biggest horror aficionado, I do like certain types of horror movies that are a little bit more patient and intellectual with their rather than indulging in the gore or the jump scares. And this certainly has elements of a horror movie, but more than anything, it is the portrayal of one woman's very twisted and fractured psyche. And there are a multitude of reasons for how it got that way that we will get into. And then as I've watched the movie again and again, I've picked up on additional layers that I think add to its darkness and its complexity and its portrayal. But the one thing that was always clear from the moment I saw the movie was that this was Natalie Portman's magnum opus in terms of performances that she's given to date. And I was certain that she would win the Oscar for it. I've rarely been so certain of anything. And when it comes to the Oscar race, even when she was not the front runner initially, but sure enough, sometimes a performance is just undeniable. And this was, a lot of times actors who win their Oscar for a role that perhaps is not considered the peak of their filmography. I think in this case, Natalie Portman proved to be the exception, because as much as I adore her performance as Padme Amidala, and I've adored her performances in many movies she's given, this is the pinnacle for her.
Yeah. This was watching the movie last night. I was brought back to sort of my state of mind of when I saw this movie in theaters, and what was so interesting was that it was this talk about your different eras. This was my era of full on Oscar watching. Mm-hmm. And so that these more, this wasn't a total independent film, because it was very much like a big project, and of course it had Natalie Portman, and it's but it was in that vein of smaller films that the Oscars gravitate towards, and they were really gravitating smaller in the aftermath of Return of the King winning Best Picture. I always joke, I say that they sort of gave the award to one of the biggest populist cinematic not only masterpieces but crowd pleasers and stuff, and they and the older Oscar voters kind of recoiled in horror and says, no, we have to go the opposite way for years and years and years. But to me at the time, all of a sudden the movies that I was super excited about were all these sort of Oscar darling films, and really following the races closely, and they became my blockbusters. So while everybody else was looking forward to big summer movies, I was craving that end of the year selection of what are going to be the awards contenders, and so talking again about Natalie Portman and her rise in the aftermath of Star Wars, I've been paying attention to her and loving her work with, the first, even before Revenge of the Sith came out in 2004, she did, I think it was 2004, she did the film Closer. Mm-hmm. With Jude Law, Julia Roberts, Clive Owen, and that is still obviously one of my favorite performances of hers. I think she's wonderful in that. And then she did V for Vendetta, which was sort of in the other direction, which was again kind of a bigger movie based on a graphic novel, but it's but that's about as conventional as you can label it, because it's quite an unconventional film. But so I've just been like, and we all love Hers Padme, and I think I've talked before about the fact that I think all the actors in the Star Wars prequels kind of had the cards stacked against them, because they were, George Lucas, God love him, he's not really an actor's director, and they were dealing with a lot of new technology. So I love the character of Padme. Thought she did some strong work there, but obviously some of these other projects allowed her to flex, some of her acting muscles a bit more, and so it was just great seeing her like sort of rise up in the ranks of people really appreciating her different performances. And then this movie comes along, and you mentioned seeing that trailer, like that to me is still one of the best movie trailers ever made, because it really prepares you for the movie that you're going to see. And I think it gives you about everything you need to know to to get hooked in, and that it's going to be a really freaky mind bender of a movie. And yeah, that there's going to be some, sexual stuff that's like you're like, oh, might want to go check that out. And I do remember, because I frequented an awards internet forum at the time, because again, I was very into Oscar watching, and I just remember the reaction when the trailer came out was like, there were a lot of people who didn't necessarily know if it was going to be an awards contender, but a lot of people were really excited about it just being a really out there, freaky, mind bender of a movie that could have either been like a work of genius or a complete mess. But either way, people were like, I don't care, I want to see it. And it turned out to be a work of absolute genius. I still remember sort of the hairs on the back of my head standing up when the movie starts, and we get the opening notes of Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake music, and then with Clint Mansell's amazingly evocative score underneath it, kind of like going dun, dun, like really just setting you on edge from the get-go, and then the screen fading up on that image of Natalie Portman, posed, and it's just so, I guess the only word I have is evocative. It's, it's just so amazing. And then I think from that first moment, it captures you, and you're in for it for the whole film until the very last minute, and then you can finally breathe again. It really is, I think, one of the best films ever made. And yeah, I love it. And I love also, like I said before, that it kind of took me back in time a little bit, because it's not a movie that I watch all the time. It's one that I tend to go back and revisit every once in a while, because it is a very harrowing experience to go through as a movie watcher. And yeah, so I'm glad we're doing this conversation, because it was great to revisit.
Yeah. It can be a movie that it is difficult to talk about for many reasons, as we'll get into, but it is well worth talking about, because there is some great thematic and visual and emotional artistry being depicted here. It's a conversation we've been promising for a while, because we have been hoping to have some of our friends on for the discussion. The timing just didn't work out. We're going to try to do it justice by ourselves. But in particular, the thing that I want to kind of really drill down on is the fact that this is a movie that while it is not a fantasy film and it is not truly a horror film, it blends those elements in such a way that feels all of a piece with the lead character's state of mind. This is Natalie Portman's movie in mints, not only because she is the lead, but because she is essentially in every frame of it. And, you know, there are certain lead performances where the actress or actor in question can't hold up the weight of the movie by themselves in that way. Natalie Portman does so here. And it's because the journey that we go on with her character feels both heartbreaking and, you know, devastating in many ways, but also cathartic and also exhilarating and also, you know, terrifying and tragic. And all of those emotions come together, you know, swirling around and emerging at different times. But it's ultimately the story of a woman who was in many ways, you know, emotionally and sexually and physically repressed and abused, finding her freedom, which obviously tracks with the subject matter that they are engaging with in the ballet, Swan Lake, that deals with very similar ideas. And so it is one of those kinds of works of, you know, homage that also feels completely original. And that's a tribute not only to Natalie Portman, but to the director, Darren Aronofsky, who has had a very interesting filmography. I do personally feel that this is his best movie. And I am keen to engage about why I think that is the case, because, you know, he's had some gems and some truly fascinating films before this and after this, but this feels singular in how it, you know, how well it aligns with an artist's vision and an actor's embodiment of that vision.
Yeah, I will say I don't love all of his movies, and that's not because of that I don't think that they're artistically very strong. But when I say that, I'm really hinting towards that. You know, I am not what one would call a fan of one of his most lauded works, which is Requiem for a Dream, because it's the movie that I have seen, and I you know, I went, that's actually a brilliant piece of art. It was incredibly well made. I never, ever, ever, ever want to see it again. And so, yeah, it's, yeah. Yeah, I remember it just made me like really upset and my skin crawling for like, you know, days after I'd seen it. So like I respect it as a piece of work, but it's I could have gone without watching. Um, and also I'm more of a fan of his work than some of his other work than a lot of people are. I actually, although I don't think it's necessarily perfect, I'm actually quite a fan of his film Noah, which I thought was extremely interesting. So it's like, yeah, it's Black Swan like occupies a sort of middle ground of like his sort of subject matter where it's like artistically such a triumph, and there is some like disturbing elements in there, obviously. But it's not so disturbing that I can't sit down and enjoy the film and watch it and all that. So it's not a full Requiem for a Dream. So I think that's why I was really able to connect with it. And so, and I think I would agree with you. I think this is his best film. It's certainly the one that I respond to the most. And part of that is Natalie Portman and her performance, and then part of it is just, I like artistically. I love the film. I love the style of the film. I love some of the places it goes. The way it, you know, doesn't really draw the line between what's reality and what's not, because we're seeing it all through the viewpoint of Nina's character. And and to her, as she slips more and more from reality, and you know uh it's, to her, what she's experiencing is all real, and so it's depicted that way, on screen. So it gets to the point where we actually don't know, um what's real and what isn't. There's a great way you can watch this, which is that, there's so many different layers of what you can sort of surmise about what's happening in reality. Um, the film doesn't really tell you at every stage. It actually provides you with like multiple conclusions you can draw about the various things that she goes through, encounters, uh, and so in that way there is no like easy answers when the movie ends. um, and yeah, so for me it's just like the perfect storm of, a bunch of different ingredients that, and I mentioned Clint Mansell's score. I wish the Academy had a category for best adapted score, because this unfortunately did not get nominated, but it's absolutely like brilliant work. um, and what he does with Tchaikovsky's score to Swan Lake, but also all his original compositions. I'm sure we will talk more about the scene, between, uh, Natalie Portman and Mila Kunis, later in the film. But if I can, step aside from the content of the scene, and and just mention the score that's underneath that scene. It's so utterly brilliant and freaky and even sexy, and just, it's, I think it's a brilliant piece of, work, the score for the whole film. Um, and I do recall being a bit upset that it was disqualified, because there's a lot more going on here than just, you know adding a couple sounds under Tchaikovsky's music. It's much more layered than that. And, but yeah, so yeah, all that is to say that I absolutely adore this movie, and that's my big, elaborate roundabout way of saying I agree with you, Jared. This is I think this is, Aronofsky's best movie.
Yeah. And it's an interesting, it comes at an interesting point in his filmography. Again, I'm not the most well versed in it, but this came out 1 year after he had kind of had his big breakthrough into more like mainstream awards recognition with The Wrestler, which was, among other things, a comeback vehicle for Mickey Rourke at the time, who also got a lead actor nomination, although he didn't win. And what's interesting is when I was reading up on this movie, apparently, Aronofsky had always been fascinated with the lives of performers. And that was one of the things that had driven him not only to the world of wrestling, but to the world of ballet. And originally, I think he wanted to kind of combine the two, but he recognized that the subject matter was a little too disparate. So they became two separate movies. And in many respects, I feel like The Wrestler is probably my second favorite movie of his, but it feels very much like a proving ground to get to this movie, which I think is kind of the apotheosis of his filmography so far. And one of the things that I admire so much about it is kind of what you touched on, the kind of differing layers of reality that are kind of layered onto the film. movies where you can't tell what exactly is real can be frustrating to me. In particular, I find it sometimes annoying and challenging when a movie will stage an entire elaborate sequence and then reveal shortly thereafter that didn't happen. But in this case, I never feel that way, because even the events of reality that are ultimately revealed to be heightened or twisted or just pure on hallucinations from Nina's fraying mind, they all serve a purpose. They are not there to, cut the legs out from underneath the audience. They are there to help us delve deeper into the psyche, the fracturing psyche of this woman. And because it all feels emotionally of a piece, it doesn't feel quite as disconnected when a scene that we had been invested in and upset by and engaged with is revealed to have a different context on it. And sometimes the movie comes out and makes it explicitly clear that the events that we just saw didn't happen. Other times it makes it clear that some version of the events did happen, but perhaps we did not see exactly what it was. And then in other cases, it probably did happen as we seen, but we're almost questioning the reality of those scenes as well.
And what's fun is this movie also, like, even sort of psychs us out with a couple things, which is kind of, I think, Aronofsky having fun with the audience. There's this, especially I don't know if I picked up on this on the first viewing, but definitely on rewatches, when Lily, played by Mila Kunis, who we'll talk about soon, because she's like, obviously this is Natalie Portman's vehicle, but there's so many great performances backing her up. When Nina comes to her home to invite her out, the way it's played is there's a knock at the door, and Nina's mother goes to get it, says it's nobody. She doesn't believe her, goes out there to see who's out there, sees Lily, and then her mother's at the door. And the way it's played, it's very much played in the vein of other scenes where Nina is hallucinating something that's not actually happening, and another person in the scene is kind of reacting, not reacting to a thing. It's almost played like that Lily could not be there at all. But then we have from context from later in the film that actually she did go there. So it's almost like Aronofsky is sort of, toying with us to, like, there's things that even like we question if they're real, but then they might be real, but then other things won't be. And it's just very unsettling as a viewer, because again, it's like all we have to go on is except for a couple instances. I think like one such instance is when during the final performance and Nina is turning into a swan, feathers and all, and then we cut to the audience view and we see that, well, she does not actually have feathers. I think that's one of the times where we actually get the sort of reality perspective on her. But for the most part, it's everything is through Nina's eyes. So everything is both real from her point of view, but also from like the audience's perspective. We just honestly don't know. It's about her emotional experience and what she's going through, and it's all real to her. So that's why in the film's language, it's portrayed as happening. And so as an audience member, that's, it's, you know, like you said, sometimes things like that can be sort of difficult and not necessarily work. I think it works absolutely brilliantly here, because what matters is Nina's psyche and with the emotions that she's going through. They're not playing like a trick on us for the sake of like a plot point or something. It's about showing what the, you know, the emotions of what she's going through, and so therefore everything, no matter how heightened, is, you know, is valid and important, you know, and all builds up to the crescendo of the final moments of the film.
And I think that in particular, the character of Lily becomes kind of a fascinating, you know, inflection point for that type of grasp on reality, because there is a school of thought, I will say, out there. I've read a strain of film criticism who have speculated that Lily is entirely a figment of Nina's imagination. I don't feel that. Hey, Laura. Yes, we are loving all talking about this particular Natalie Portman film, and there will be others in the future. And
yeah,
thank you.
I will say I agree. Like, no, I don't. But then I see where that theory might come from.
I see where it comes from, because the movie does support it. It's just that I think it's more interesting if Lily is in fact real, and I think the movie supports that she's real by having other characters, namely Thomas Leroy, the ballet company, actually like acknowledge her presence. So I don't think that theory holds up. It is clear that there are sequences involving Lily that are not happening in reality, and Nina is very much imagining her in that way. But I think it's meant to show how this woman is entrenching herself in Nina's psyche to such an extent that the lines between what Nina understands to be herself and the aspect of herself that she wishes she could reach are embodied very much by Lily. And whether that is meant to be a sexual attraction or just kind of a desire to unlock, you know, her own kind of, you know, sexual and identity, it is very much, you know, Lily is the kind of the dark mirror and the ideal in that way, because as Thomas, you know, kind of puts out into the movie, you know, Lily is not as technically precise as Nina, but she moves so freely and with such an ease and a confidence that she is in many respects the woman who Nina both fears and wishes she could be, which makes her perfect for the duality of the White Swan and the Black Swan.
The reason why I think that she is a real person, aside from the fact that she is acknowledged by, you know, other kids, although that's by no means, you know, proof when the entire film is from Nina's perspective. But it's the fact that so often Lily is doing things that, in an effort to be kind to Nina, to reach out, and Nina is, through her perspective, viewing that as, you know, through a negative lens of this person's out to get me. But we, the audience, can see that no, there's actually different intent there behind the camera, or not behind the camera, but just from that Nina is not perceiving, and it seems to me that would be an odd choice if she's a you know, just part of Nina's delusions. It just seems, because there's that layer to Lily that Nina is not quite seeing, or chooses not to see, then you know, that for me votes in favor of she is actually a real person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, frankly, the movie works better if that is the case, because it gives us kind of an anchor to hold on to in the midst of this story of this woman whose, again, reality and emotional psyche is fracturing. It is more rewarding if she is seeing things that actually are there but misinterpreting them than it is that she is just essentially creating this woman out of whole cloth. Because ultimately, when it comes to what the journey that Nina is going on in this movie, she is unlocking a part of herself that she has kept repressed for perhaps her entire life and perhaps has never unlocked before. But in many respects, the fact is that the Lily, who throughout, is credited and very much as the Black Swan, even though Nina herself becomes the Black Swan by the end of the movie, is that Lily, she represents a threat to Nina, but also kind of an allure, someone who could be a guide to her. And I think it makes more sense that, given the fact that Nina is in many respects so lost and so fearful at the beginning of this movie, that it is someone else who is coaxing this out of her, even though the emotions that she is feeling and the kind of the trauma that she is working through are entirely from her own life. This is the kind of thing where, like, the paranoia that Nina feels towards Lily, and also the attraction that she feels towards her, makes more sense to me if there is a grounded note of reality, which then she is kind of misinterpreting and expanding, than if she is just because then it kind of feels like she is being, essentially led on this journey before she finally seizes control.
Yeah. Plus, I just think that some of Lily's moments are funnier if she is a real person. That's, there's obviously when they talk, after, Nina believes they've spent the night together, and Lily has this great moment of, but we what? And she is like, oh, did you have some kind of lesbian wet dream about me? Was I good? And I just find that really funny. That it's better if she's not just in Nina's head, but that this is, an actual real person having an honest reaction to the things going on. So.
Yeah. So I think we've made it clear where we stand on that dynamic, but that's not to say that the other interpretation isn't valid. It's just that when I watch the movie, I very much engage with it as Lily is a real person, and the feelings that Nina is feeling towards her, both positively and negatively, shall we say, are meant to be feelings that are being unlocked within her because of this external force, as opposed to just a purely internal journey.
Well, and yeah, but the great thing about this movie is that it's very much open to your interpretation. So like you said, very we're not shutting down anybody who feels differently, because as I was talking about earlier, what's sort of great about this movie is that it treats everything that Nina is experiencing as reality, and that doesn't just go for like the big crazy stuff like growing feathers or transforming legs into a swan. Like, that's the really crazy stuff, but also just like little moments that wouldn't feel out of step with reality. We really don't know what's real and what's in her imagination. and so that's why, again, I think that the film supports many different interpretations, and we're not really being told, this is absolutely, what transpired. So I think the film definitely is like opens itself up to, if that's your take on it, then I'm certainly not going to say no, you're full of crap. But I think you and I are on the same note on this particular story element. But let's let's talk a little bit about some of the more toxic people in Nina's life, played by some outstanding actors. We have the quite honestly awful Tomas, played by the great Vincent Cassel, who seems to excel at playing scumbags. Um, and then Nina's mother, Erica, played by Barbara Hershey, who, like, just like, the older I get, the more I'm like, wow, girl, you have some issues. Um, yeah.
No, I definitely, the more I have watched this movie, the more and more and more I am getting, I pick up a certain vibe from Barbara Hershey's Erica that makes gives the movie some additional power, but also makes it much more tragic and heartbreaking. Because I do feel that many of Nina's core issues, shall we say, are a direct result of her relationship with her mother. Her mother is abusive,
Yeah.
psychologically for sure. In many respects, I think perhaps physically and perhaps even sexually as well. One of the things that I picked up on recent watches through the movie are the moments where it does seem like there are elements where Erica may have been taking advantage of her daughter, and they are very, they're subtle. They never make it explicit, but when you watch them and you see them, you can't unsee them. I think just to name a few, Erica making her daughter lick the frosting off of her finger, Erica undressing her daughter without her permission, Erica asking her daughter, "Are you ready for me?" Nina's attempt to try and block off the door that her mother then stops. Once I saw those, I'm like, I don't know if that was the movie's explicit intent, but it does add a layer to it that makes it clear that this is part of why Nina is the way that she is. And that perhaps her very clear sexual repression and almost infantilization in the beginning of the movie is a direct response to this. The very first thing that we see, an image of Nina outside of the opening coda, is we see her waking up in her childhood bedroom with stuffed animals everywhere. And then the very next shot that we get is of her kind of worn and bruised feet that are a direct result of the hard work that she puts them through as a ballet dancer. But it is a very direct visual metaphor of the kind of the physical and emotional trauma that Nina has, that is living beneath this kind of very repressed and childlike exterior. I'm not saying that that's the only interpretation of the movie. It's just one that I found hard to let go of now that I've seen it. And I do think that it informs her journey in many respects. Because, and this is all to say that, Barbara Hershey as Erica does a great job with the performance. It is more and more, I feel, a performance of someone who is, meant to be, in many ways, the true villain of the movie, even more than Tomas.
Yeah. I remember the first time I heard those interpretations of the relationship. I was like, oh wait, I did not connect the dots on that one, and I'm still not even sure how much that's my personal interpretation, but I think it is there as a suggestion.
Yeah.
And because this is the type of movie where you don't fully know what's real and what isn't, you know, I think that's all that stuff is kind of there to put up red flags for, you know, and if you're watching. But the truth is, I don't really know what's intended or not intended. But yeah, it's like once those certain elements you mentioned are kind of brought to your attention, it's a bit hard to unsee them. At least I recognize that is a, you know, a possible, you know, um, again, like I said, I don't know if that's what Aronofsky is saying the relationship is, but the breadcrumbs are there if you follow them. So
yeah, no, and it's an uncomfortable aspect of the movie to think about and consider, you know, because ultimately we're going to these movies to be entertained and informed, and this is, you know, a challenging and dangerous and horrific subject in many respects. But I do think that it works for this movie's purposes because the movie does not make it explicit. If it did, then it would have to reckon with it much more directly. But instead, it allows it to kind of be a layer of Nina's psyche that makes it clear that, you know, this is why, as I said, why she is the way she is, and the exact nature of the abuse that she has suffered at Erica's hands is ultimately something that is better left to the imagination, frankly. Especially when in contrast with the much more overt, you know, sexual abuse that she endures from someone like Tomas, because that is meant to be obviously very much in our face and not something that's left for interpretation. This kind of is much more tragic and insidious.
yeah, I will say that whatever the exact nature of the abuse, she is clearly, you know, being abused by her mother, you know, just because there's so much wrong with that relationship, like even before you factor in that as a possibility. So yeah, it's like I said, as I've gotten older, I've been more and more creeped out by their dynamic uh, and relationship. But yeah, God. Let's talk about Vincent Cassel, you know, for that as Tomas, because he is the worst.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, just like the minute he comes onto the screen, uh, first of all, like let's get it even beyond like you know, uh, you know, the sexual nature of, you know, his all the terrible stuff he does, and you know, the manipulation and all that. He proves himself just to be insufferable just with the words. You know, when he says they're going to do a new production of Swan Lake, and he says, "Done to death, I know, but not like this. We're going to strip it down, make it real." For me, as soon as I heard that, I was like, "Oh, shut the fuck up." Because I like I always hate it when I hear that kind of stuff about stage productions. Um, it's like just Just, dude, you're not changing that much, dude. But anyway, the more important element of that in that scene comes from when he taps the shoulders of half the dancers, and right off the bat you see how manipulative he is. The fact that he's not selecting those dancers; those are the dancers who can go, and it's the other ones that are being selected to compete. For for not only the role of the Swan Queen, but to be in the production, and it's like, yeah. So right from the get go, you're like, all right, this guy's an asshole.
Mm-hmm.
And that's before we get into any of the other stuff. But yeah, it's like everybody always thinks that I'm a real snob when it comes to this stuff, but like my bullshit detector is always up for for certain things. No, but yeah, but I will say that nobody plays this kind of role quite like Vincent Cassel. He's so like, all apologies to him, but like he does play Stevie so well, and he's got, he's been in a bunch of other stuff. I love him in the what's Eastern Promises, the Viggo Mortensen film, and also what else was he's in A Dangerous Method as well. And yeah, he has a certain character type, but he does such a great job.
Yeah. No, I mean, I had been most familiar with him before I saw this movie, with him as in the Oceans movies and Oceans 12 and 13, where he very much played the kind of the rich and smarmy character who believed he was intellectually superior to everyone, and that is the role that he is taking on here. But also he is a character who is clearly someone who enjoys his power and enjoys using his power both psychologically and physically in ruling this little fiefdom of the dance troupe that he is head of. And ultimately, what makes him, both a compelling character and a loathsome character, in certain aspects, a funny character and a pathetic character, is that this is an archetype that we are all familiar with, as you said. This is anyone who has engaged in any kind of artistic pursuit or has watched movies about said artistic pursuit recognizes this character archetype of the intellectually self-important and ultimately kind of full of shit artiste, as Cassie says, pronounced specifically that way, not artist, artiste. And that makes him, it obviously sets us up to view him as, in some certain respects, the villain of the piece. But he also becomes much more of the, in many respects, the character who is driving Nina to unlock the part of herself that she has kept repressed. And ultimately, when she does unlock that, it's meant to be a triumphant moment for her, but not because he has been pushing her to this, but because it was ultimately necessary for her. And that is something that becomes complicated because clearly when Thomas Leroy, the character's name, wants Nina to become more, sexually free and open and dance the Black Swan in a more liberated way, he has very selfish reasons for wanting that from her. But this is ultimately a journey that Nina wants to go on herself, even though she's denying herself. The one thing that even though Nina is an incredibly repressed character, the one thing that is clear from the very beginning of the movie is that she wants this role. She wants to be the Swan Queen. She wants it in many respects, as she says later in the movie, it to be her turn to shine. But she doesn't know how to go about getting that. When she comes to Tomas to basically ask him for the part after it becomes clear that she's probably not going to get it based on her audition, again, Thomas is being very loathsome in his approach, but when he tells her, no, I'm going to pick Veronica, and then he opens the door and she's like, okay, thank you, and gets ready to leave, and then he shuts the door in her face and it's basically like, that's it, you're not going to try to convince me. And then he says something that is, harsh and ugly, but also true. He's like, why did you come here if you didn't, if you weren't going to try to convince me? You clearly, that's what you intended to do. And it's an unsettling scene because he's about to, attempt to kiss her against her will. And it's the moment where she finally starts to unlock something in herself, a little bit of that defensive and, darker instinct when she bites him. And obviously in that moment, we are meant to think like, good, get the fuck away from this guy. And it's made all the more tragic when he's like, yes, that's what I wanted from you. And then he gives her.
But also, I will say, and to be clear, this is a character who is completely loathsome. But this is when Vincent Cassel's comedic chops also come out as well, where he's like, "You bit me. I can't believe you bit me." That fucking hurt.
Again, he's pathetic in many respects.
Yeah.
In addition to being malevolent.
Oh yeah. That's one of the great elements of this character is that he's horrible, but he's also pathetic. As you say, and so we come away from the end of the film he is kind of set up as the sort of villain of the piece, and when the movie ends, he is a villain. As a person, but he's not really, he doesn't come across as powerful enough to be quote unquote the villain, because ultimately Nina takes, matters into her own hands, as destructive as that ends up being. And so that is a critical element of his character, that this is a sad, pathetic person. Again, who thinks himself the great artiste. But and of course, later in the film, we get the absolutely horrid moment of when, he dismisses everybody else and dances with her to kind of coax the Black Swan out of her. And then, he obviously does things that are despicable and, then says, that was me seducing you. It should be the opposite. And it's an absolutely disgusting moment. And, but then and I believe that happened just because Tomas is that horrible. So, but also going back to what I was saying earlier, what's interesting about that moment is that also because everybody else is gone and we're seeing everything through Nina's perspective, there is an element even there of what's actually happening. And to be clear, I think that did happen, but it's just the way that this entire film is played of just being sort of uncertain, but everything in his demeanor and attitude, it tells me that actually that was one of the real moments. But yeah, he's just utterly, detestable. And the fact that he's sad and pathetic just makes it even worse. Because this is someone who has, who likes having that power and authority over other people to his ends, and it's just so sad the way that he is dismissive of, and also the way he thinks of Winona Ryder's character. It's just, you just want to, smack the shit out of him at so many points during the movie.
Yeah, no, I mean, he is in many respects the movie's most grounded character, because he is the one who feels the most, sadly, relatable to the real world, in that there are people very much like this who abuse their positions of power to take advantage of those who are under them. And the fact that this is clearly a pattern of his, what makes him even more, kind of loathsome is made clear that all of the women in the ballet troupe kind of know that this is the way that he is, and that this is kind of the price you have to pay if you want to get ahead in this particular ballet company. It is certainly implied that, Beth McIntyre, Winona Ryder's character, who is also credited in many respects in the end credits as, quote, the dying swan, because, God forbid, she had the temerity to get old, and is not as exciting to Tomas and perhaps the world anymore. How dare he disrespect Winona Ryder like that? I would say that it's the thing about him is that this is essentially, he almost knows his place in a way. Like, this is like, if he had to ever step outside of this little fiefdom that he's carved out for himself, he would be completely lost. And he knows, like, for instance, when he goes and does his ass kissing, as he puts it, to the wealthy patrons of the arts, that they need the money to fund this new and exciting version of Swan Lake that's been done to death, but this time will be different. It's that, he very much views this all as a game, and he is like kind of the king at the center of the chessboard in that way, because he knows he basically has, certain conditions that if you play by his rules, he will let you get ahead. And there are certain things that he wants to kind of coax out of his dancers. It is very clear that he does not just want to, see them, like as his, he doesn't, like, when he takes Nina back to his apartment, for instance, he clearly was intending to try and sleep with her there. But when it becomes clear to him that she's not going to play back, that she's not going to make a game of it, that she can't because of her own hangups and issues, he immediately loses interest, and has the very cruel line where he tells her, I have a homework assignment for you. Go home and touch yourself, live a little. And then says that the doorman will, escort her out. That makes him very much a predator in many ways. Even though he very much easily could have taken advantage of her there. He is not the kind of predator who is going to just take down a wounded creature. He wants to hunt. He wants the chase, and but he wants the stakes to be fairly contained, because it's clear that he can't actually handle the game if it gets too dangerous. And that's ultimately what makes him not the movie's true villain, as loathsome as he is, because it's clear that, like, Nina doesn't need to overcome him in many respects. She needs to overcome herself. And once she does that, she is essentially will have left him behind for good. It would be a very different movie if he was the character that she needed to, triumph over. Because sad as it is to say, and dark as it is to say, in many respects, he gets what he wants by the end. He gets Nina to unlock the dark side of herself and give this grand performance. Ultimately, it's kind of a hollow victory given what happens, but he almost while he looms large throughout the first 2/3 of the movie, he ultimately kind of fades by the end. And that's why I do feel that, having now watched the movie several more times, I do feel that Barbara Hershey's Erica is in many respects the movie's true human villain. And Nina, Nina overcoming her own issues. Nina is also very much the villain herself in many ways, as well as the hero. So, like I said, that's what makes this movie so complicated and so interesting to watch, because none of the characters are really, all that sympathetic, other than maybe Beth. But even Beth has her clear, darker side. And, this is kind of a toxic maze that Nina has to feel her way through in order to reach the light and the liberation that comes with death.
I do want to mention real quick, so now that we've mentioned Beth a couple times, like one of my favorite moments, not only of this movie, but probably just one of my favorite Winona Ryder moments is just when she's trashing her room in the beginning, and Nina is watching, and she comes out of there and she looks at Nina and she's just like, "What?"
Mm-hmm.
And then just storms off. It's like we all know that feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's a very small role, Winona Ryder, in this movie, but it's a pivotal one, and she's great in the few scenes that she has. When she confronts Nina after the fundraiser and is clearly, drunk and desperate and clinging to what the one thing that she knows, which is her role as the lead prima ballerina in this company. And we get layers of tragedy unlocked from her in that performance when, she spits out at Nina, like, "What did you do to get this role?" And she throws out, "Did you suck his cock?" And, in one of the moments where we see her kind of starting to have a little bit more of a spark and fight to her, kind of coldly says, "Not all of us have to," implying very much that is what Beth did. And whether or not she did or not, it understandably sends Beth into a rage, a self-destructive rage that is both, empathetic, but also, you want better for her. You want to believe that, she can recognize that there is life outside of this company. And the fact that immediately after the scene, she just goes and walks into the street to try and kill herself and fails and ends up with, broken and mangled legs that she will never be able to use as a dancer again. It is a truly dark vision of the fate that could have awaited Nina herself in many ways. Had she not found a different form of escape.
And like one of the sort of creepiest moments comes later in the film, before the final performance, when Nina goes to visit Beth for a second time in the hospital, and starts to return the items that she's, shall we say, lifted from from her room, and Beth is is sitting there. She's awake and starts talking to her, and we get this sort of real moment from her of I'm not perfect and all this stuff. But what's going on in that scene is that Nina is obviously like becoming more and more fractured by this point. And so from her point of view, Beth starts stabbing herself in the face. Nina runs off into the elevator, and then we see the what do you call it?
The file, I don't know.
The file, like in her hand, and her hands are bloody. So that we're thinking, oh, did she stab her in the face? But then, you know, what's probably the reality is that none of that actually happened, and she's even, you know, imagining the blood on her own hands. So that's why what I was saying earlier about so many layers of reality and unreality, and you know, and all this stuff, and so you're left wondering what kind of interaction did she actually have with Beth there, if at all. Um, and it just, it's one of those really disturbing, you know, moments in a movie full of disturbing moments. um, but but I love Winona Ryder's acting in that scene, you know, before it starts to turn violent. It's because we get, if part of that exchange actually happened, it's, I don't know what that portends for her, if she's sort of maybe the accident was a wake up call for her, and maybe she recognizes she needs to turn things around, or maybe she'll spiral even more. It's you know, given the nature of this film, we're not left to, you know, find out the fates of certain characters, you know, beyond what Nina experiences. But I hope things get better for her, because
Yeah.
um, because she doesn't deserve to just sort of lose all meaning in her life at the whim of an asshole like Tomas, you know. And hopefully she finds, you know, finds her way to a better, healthier life.
Yeah. It's ultimately, you know, with a movie that is so singularly focused on Nina as its main character, many of the supporting characters exist to serve as reflections or, you know, catalysts for Nina's own emotional journey. And Beth, that kind of is the role that she ultimately takes on. Um, you know, as kind of a dark foreshadowing for what could have been Nina's fate, as well as what she, you know, needs to unlock. Because there is a really, one of my favorite scenes surround, you know, about Beth, even though Beth doesn't appear in it, is a moment after she is has walked into the street and, you know, attempted to kill herself and failed and maimed herself instead. Um, is when Nina and Tomas are sitting by the fountain and they're discussing what happened, and Tomas is certain that Beth did this on purpose and is correct. And when Nina asks him how he knows, Tomas says, because everything Beth does comes from within, from some dark impulse. I guess that's what makes her so thrilling to watch, so dangerous, even perfect at times, but also so damn destructive. And that about foreshadows the journey that Nina herself will go on
Yeah.
throughout this movie. You know, she is ultimately what she strives for throughout this movie, as is said from, you know, from the very beginning, and ultimately leads all the way up to the final line. What she is seeking is perfection. And she had always believed that the technical precision that she excels at would be the route to that. But ultimately, this is what, even though Tomas, again, is very much a loathsome character, he is unfortunately right here, that the perfection that Nina is seeking will only be unlocked when she manages to access this darker, more impulsive side of herself. And Nina manages to fuse those two elements, the technical precision and the kind of the darker, liberated freedom, into her final performance that ultimately gives that sense of perfection she's been longing. But obviously, as we know, there is a terrible cost to pay for
that. Yeah. Well, as far as Tomas being right there, as we like to say, even a broken clock is right twice a day. Let's go ahead and pause for the mid roll, and then we'll pick back up. Following up on, you know, this week we're talking about Miss Natalie Portman. Next week we return to Miss Keira Knightley for Knights of Kira stream. We'll be talking about the film Anna Karenina. which I've been looking forward to talking about for a while. It's the third film in the Kira Joe Wright trilogy, and yeah, there's going to be a lot of fun stuff to talk about there because it's very different from the other two films, although a bit of a culmination because Joe Wright was kind of looking to chip away at sort of the conventional, guardrails of cinema, throughout Pride and Prejudice and Atonement. With Atonement, you can see, the dialogue is much different than what we get in Pride and Prejudice. The dialogue of Atonement is very clipped, and and so the culmination of trying to chip away at the more conventional cinema, reached its sort of apex with Anna Karenina. That it's it's a cross between cinema and a stage play, and I know a lot of people had issues with that when I originally came out. You talked about the fact that you struggled with it a little bit. So we're going to be able to talk through that, and I'll be able to go on about how much I absolutely adored that, almost immediately. And so, but I was biased, of course, when the movie came out, because, but it'll be great to talk about that. And yeah, so still haven't figured out quite what we're talking about the week after that, but up ahead, in the weeks ahead, we'll be coming back around to Rings of Power for the discussion of the second half of season 2, which, looking forward to that. I enjoyed this past week's episode, which gave me a lot of the Anatar Celebrimbor content that I'd been waiting for, and it looks like things are only getting worse for poor Celebrimbor. So yeah, looking forward to that, and then we'll figure out a longer schedule, of what's to come after that. I feel like maybe we should probably set up a proper Halloween stream. And get, I mean, this kind of taps the horror vibe, but not, but it's not quite in that Halloween type way. We got to find something that ticks that particular box.
I think we have some good options on our list that we refer to when we're looking to set up future streams. Definitely was hoping throughout in October that we could, indulge a little bit more in maybe not outright horror films, but movies that feel of a piece with the season. And there are some great ones on our list that I think would be excellent candidates for that. So we'll settle on those sooner rather than later. In the interim, yes, Anna Karenina next week is going to be an interesting discussion, a rewarding discussion, I think, because I do think that the movie is a rather beautiful piece of art, even though I have been open about the fact that it did challenge me on initial viewings, and there are still elements of it that make me wonder, perhaps if it had been, done differently, would I have responded to certain things more? But ultimately, anytime I watch this movie, once I get past those initial hangups, I always find it very rewarding. And I think that as a culmination to the Joe Wright, Keira Knightley trilogy, it feels very much of a piece. And it also, as though it will be the Knights of Kira stream, and we will devote most of the adoration towards our dear Lady Love. I will also be setting aside a separate section of the stream to gush about another actress who is present in the movie, who I fell head over heels for, which is one Miss Alicia Vikander.
Which this was the first time that, at least this is the first time I know I was introduced to her, and yeah, it's. I just love that she was, again, it probably wasn't her first role, but it's the one where I think a lot of people at least noticed her for the first time. She is so I'm as far as I'm concerned, she walked onto the silver screen as an angel amongst the clouds, um, with actual clouds behind her, or staged clouds at least. And no, she was absolutely phenomenal in the role, and she's gone on to absolutely amazing, wonderful things. But since we're previewing next that stream, I did just bring up, because I'm going to be all about showing the all my pictures from that movie. So here's a preview of Kira from the film, and oh my God, just this, like, obviously she's always breathtaking, but this movie, the film did win best costume design. At least I think it did. If it didn't, it should have. Yeah, she's just absolutely mesmerizing in this film. This was in this era where I was just like so happy every time there was a new Keira Knightley movie to come out, and I was racing out to the theater. I say that like that era is over. It's not, but but it was like bigger than a blockbuster film event for me. And I remember the evening that I went out to the cinema to see this, and just holding my breath in for the entire duration of the film.
Yeah. The movie did win best costume design, by the way. I just
okay, yeah.
Which, when you get Kira to wear your costumes, you have a built-in advantage, but that doesn't mean it wasn't fairly won by Jacqueline Duran, because it's exquisite work for the time period. But yeah, it's a movie that has an incredibly stacked cast. I will also be gushing about separately the performances of Jude Law, of Matthew McFadden, playing a very different role than Mr. Darcy in this movie. Donald Gleason is great. Yeah.
Just like that mustache alone that he has. Like, not only like is it fun just to see that dynamic between the two of them where they're playing brother and sister as opposed to romantic interest, but also just like he is like just he gives the most outrageously funny, over the top in a good way. Like, and this is what I was talking about with the style of the movie, that it immediately appealed to me. I love the fact that the movie opens up on a stage and he's sitting there, at the barber shop, or not at the barber shop at all. Maybe he has his own personal barber because he is supposed to be rich after all. I'm not sure what the context there actually is, but the barber then proceeds to just, in 2 single swipes, shave his beard completely, just leave the perfect mustache, and it's just this great combination of like, a live stage performance and something that's only possible in cinema. And we'll obviously talk about it more next week, but I just love the fact that this is a character who is just an absolute cad, but he thinks he's the victim, of course. And he's like, what? It's not my fault. But yeah, no, that's going to be a whole lot of fun. We'll get to talk about Kira, Matthew, Jude Law, Alicia Vikander. You mentioned Dom Gleason in one of my favorite.
So good.
It's one of my favorite performances of his, and he's always great, but he's especially good in this. And and a lot of other really great actors in small roles throughout the film as well. We didn't mention Aaron Taylor Johnson. Obviously, he's kind of a big part of the movie. As Count Vronsky, he's kind of a important part of the Anna Karenina story. But there's a lot of other big actors in smaller roles, and we'll talk about that. And So, and anything else before we get back in? to Black Swan?
Nope, just we'll stay tuned for, that'll be next week. Then stay tuned for the announcement of what we'll be discussing on the 29th. But then the week after that, back to the end of the Rings of Power, which I also loved this past week's episode, even though I thought it might have been the darkest episode of the entire series in many respects. And I think those vibes are only going to continue. So I can't wait.
Although I did get pretty annoyed. I saw some things online where, somebody commented, I think the Rings of Power has finally found its stride. I'm like, no. It's had its stride. This was just a great episode. But yeah. Okay. Aside from that, I will take, as we're going back into the Black Swan discussion, this feels like a good time to show off my physical media for the movie. I have the Blu-ray release, which is still an amazing edition of the film with great picture quality, sound, some extras. It still stands up, even though this came out 14 years ago. And then also, of course, you all know I've got the soundtrack on CD, which is becoming increasingly difficult these days for movies that I love. Shame on the marketplace. But I'm glad to have those CD releases of some really classic film scores. Yeah, Cassie, sorry. Yeah, we'll have to wait a couple weeks to talk about something that was taken from us in this episode. Let's just say that I really want to hurt in ways that cannot be counted one particular character. Character who until now was a bit of an annoying nuisance, and now he is one of the worst people to ever exist. Okay, but we have to wait. Okay, let's dive back into Black Swan. Okay, where do you want to pick up?
Well, I think a good place to kind of pick up might be to address, head on the dynamic between Nina and Lily, because this is, we've kind of alluded to it in the beforehand, but specifically the fact that once Thomas makes Nina makes Lily Nina's alternate, then she becomes very much the kind of the alluring mirror, the Black Swan to Nina's White Swan that has, is what she is striving to attain and striving to, in many ways, to be. But given that we also talked about the fact that this scene, that there is a clear element of Nina needing to unlock her kind of sexual, being and the repression that she's been under, this is the scene that makes it clear what's actually, going on here, without again being explicit. It's a scene that is unambiguously a scene that did not happen, but it's also one of, in many ways, the most revealing scenes in the entire movie, because it's the moment where we truly see Nina lose herself for the first time, and we get the sense. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I do want to talk about that moment early on when Nina goes in to watch Lily performing, in the practice. She's up in the stands watching her. There's this dichotomy, which really is their whole dynamic of envy and suspicion of her being a rival, but also just in the way that the camera lingers on Mila Kunis, and of course this is from everything's from Nina's point of view. There's also, as becomes evident throughout later in the film, as much of that there's a sense of rivalry there. There's also a clear attraction, and so it's this. It's this two-sided thing of she views her as a threat, but also, she's very interested in her as well, which she may not even, fully get on a conscious level. But that's a great thing about cinema and the way the camera captures, and especially when you're seeing from somebody's point of view. It's, I always say that, and of course I bring everything back to Kira, but I always say it's one of the worst kept secrets of cinema that Joe Wright is probably in love with Kira like the rest of us are, because the way that he films her, it is just so like, it's otherworldly and it's amazing. And it's a sort of a similar thing to Kira. From everything is from Nina's point of view, and just Lily ends up looking very almost angelic in the way she moves, which is not only, which is also a comment on the way she dances and stuff, but it's also the way that Nina perceives her.
Yeah.
And,
and it should be noted that I believe Natalie Portman recommended Mila Kunis for this role. They're good friends, or outside of the film, so in the real world. So it helps that she had that level of familiarity with her beforehand, because it makes their dynamic, even though these two women are very much in certain way strangers to each other meeting for the first time, the dynamic between them feels electric when they actually get to share the scene together. And a lot of that does come down to Mila Kunis's performance of portraying a character who just exudes confidence and mischievousness and fun in many respects. You get why Nina is so fascinated by her, because she's an alluring person. She's an alluring person to be around. And for someone like Nina, who is very much repressing aspects of her identity through trauma, and because of her desire to achieve technical perfection, she represents in many respects the dark forbidden fruit that Nina has never allowed herself to indulge in. And that's one of the things that makes the question of Nina's sexuality so interesting. The first time I watched the movie, I very much interpreted it as a straight, Nina is a repressed lesbian, and she is having these feelings that are coming out towards Lily. I think ultimately Nina's sexuality is meant to be a little bit more complex, and the movie doesn't need to put that definitive label on it, because we also see Nina have sexual encounters with men throughout the movie. And we see her have a very fraught dynamic with Lily at times. Ultimately, I think it's just meant to be that Lily is unlocking something in Nina that she has never allowed herself to have. And when she has the chance, or thinks she has the chance, to finally, let loose in that way, that's where we see the side of Nina that will ultimately become the Black Swan. This is, when they're out and dancing in the club, and we see Nina be much, this is when we see Nina finally stand up to her mother and kind of like laugh and mock her in many respects. And when she finally gets the chance to, she thinks she's brought Lily back to her apartment and they're gonna, have sex. You finally feel like Nina is. This is perhaps the only time in the movie where we see Nina happy, except at the very end. Even before that, when she has roles, the moments like when she gets the role of the white the Swan Queen. And what is the first thing that she does? She goes to the bathroom and calls her mother in a kind of very uncomfortable scene, again, seeming very infantilized in that way, referring to her as mommy and saying, "Oh, I'll be home soon." And then immediately she steps out, and it's undercut because someone has written "whore" on the glass. This is when Nina manages to have this night, she thinks, with Willie, it feels like a sexual release because it is. It's also a darker undertone because we're also seeing the visual hallucinations of the feathers starting to ripple on her skin. But it almost, it comes across and is played in very much ways as a kind of triumphant scene for her until it isn't, until the very end, when after, just to be blunt, when after Lily finishes Nina, shall we say, what happens? This is when she morphs into Nina herself, which is something we've seen throughout the movie. Nina seeing dark reflections of herself in other women who are more confident and more, open with their emotions than she is. And it becomes a whore sequence at the end because, of course, this dark version of Lily / Nina lets out the refrain, "Sweet girl," which is what her mother had been saying to her, and then throws the pillow over her face. So it's a scene that feels electric and exciting and becomes terrifying by the
end. Yeah. I will say that, when did this come out? 2010. So, trying to think. So, mid 20s. This was a very, this scene took me to some different places, within the couple minutes that it runs, and and ends on a very disturbing note. And yeah, it's, but I'm just going to go and say it as a kid who, as a young man who had, come of age watching both the Star Wars prequels and that 70s show. Just gonna say it didn't suck.
Yeah. No, and I mean, and I know that there's a larger conversation to be had about like the male gaze in these scenes.
Yeah.
But I think, at ultimate sense, especially since this movie was directed and written by men, but I do think that the scene is meant to, serve a purpose far beyond mere, titillation. It needs to be a scene that feels, exciting to the character of Nina and to the audience as well, because ultimately this is a moment that is a pivotal moment in the movie. It is in the moment when it becomes clear once and for all that something has been unlocked in Nina and it will not be put away again. And so it is one of the most important scenes in the movie, and it earns that place by making us, party to it and engaged with it, and us feeling that release with Nina that feels exhilarating and becomes terrifying, which is very much the vibe that carries through the rest of the movie.
And sorry, I had to. If we're gonna show any images from the movie, sorry, I'll take flack for this one, but had to upload a certain GIF. Just saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But okay, I'll leave it there. But no, had to get it in. Sorry. But yeah, no, it's. I will say that, and this is one of the reasons why I still have, because I know there's an interpretation of this scene that involves Nina's mother, which I still don't know if I like subscribe to that, because I feel like the way this scene is shot, especially once we have the camera on Nina and what she's going through. It feels very much like this is the we see very repeatedly throughout the film that she's trying to have, shall we say, private moments. And this feels like it's the culmination of that she's imagining the scenario with Lily, but that she's, exploring things. Shall we say? So I choose not to view this as like the darker interpretation of that this could be a scene of assault, but more that this is a scene of liberation for her. And maybe it's just because I don't want to go down that rabbit hole with the other way, but for me, it's my preferred interpretation of the sequence.
Yeah, no, I personally also subscribe to it. Well, while I do think, as we've alluded to, that there are certainly strong hints throughout the movie that Nina may have suffered some form of physical or sexual abuse at the hands of her mother. I don't think that is what's going on in this scene. I think that it is meant to be a, or release for Nina. It is meant to be a triumphant moment for her, again, that becomes terrifying as she kind of unlocks her sexuality for the first time in a way that's truly her own. When she achieves orgasm, she is truly, it feels authentic there. It is not something where, she'd had the conversation with Tomas earlier in the movie where he'd asked her straight up if she was a virgin, and she was kind of demurring and kind of deflecting in the way that makes me suspicious of, like, perhaps she is, or perhaps she isn't, or perhaps it's, she's never had a sexual experience quite like this one before. And even though Lily is ultimately not there, it is a moment where Nina is finally in control of her sexual being for the first time, that does not ultimately pay off in a way that makes it feel like she is, this is a moment where she's being taken advantage of. It feels like a moment where she has ultimately achieved something that, again, she may not be able to control now, and that, I think, tracks a little bit more with the idea of the the White Swan and the Black Swan, and the kind of the alluring, seduction of, Nina's descent into darkness, because this is ultimately a place where, at a certain point, if she's going to go to the dark side, literally and figuratively, she needs to go, willingly, and this is a moment where it really feels like she makes the choice to start going down that path.
Yeah, because it's after this that that her grasp on reality just becomes more and more fractured, and yeah, God, it's quite a trip as watching the stuff that comes after this, as it becomes, the things that she experiences become more and more outlandish, as, like, her mother's drawings and paintings start coming to life, and then she's pulling feathers from her back where she's been scratching, and then the moment the legs is like, oh wow, this is going into a whole different realm. But yeah, it all kind of starts to fracture, and somebody who's clearly kind of struggled with sort of problems and issues of obviously the movie kind of lets us understand that she's had some mental issues in the past, and someone who's sort of going through abuse from many different angles. This is not the kind of person to whom you should, give drugs to, that is going to further, untether them from reality. And, but that, so it's with that she has this experience, but then even after that, it seems like this is kind of the breaking point, for her.
Yeah. Yeah. And
yeah,
I do think.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Cassie made an interesting point in the chat where she was talking about from another angle. I'm not sure why I've heard this movie speak of why she's so tied to a moral compass pointed in one direction. And I think this is one of the dynamics that the movie makes the movie so fascinating, because it does seem on the surface like it's basically saying that the white swan, that Nina is embodying at the beginning is kind of the very, virginal and repressed, and the black swan is the kind of the sexually liberated version of herself that she ultimately needs to become. But the movie doesn't present that as an unambiguously a good thing. And I do think that is tied ultimately up in the question of the Swan Queen story itself, as the Nina gives the summation to, throughout the movie, and as does Tomas, the Swan Queen at its core is a story of a woman who was turned against her will into a swan by an evil sorcerer and needs the true love to break the spell. And then she thinks she finds it, but then her prince falls in love with the wrong girl, the, more sexually liberated version of the girl, and essentially dooming the white, the Swan Queen. And so she kills herself, and that's how she finds ultimate liberation. That is very much a story about a character, that is in many respects powerless throughout the aspect of their journey and only finds that power at the end. And this is where I think that Nina's journey into ultimately finding more of like a way to reclaim a more powerful version of herself gets a little bit more complicated than that, because it is ultimately not presented as an unambiguously good thing that the very like sweet and in certain respects timid Nina is becoming this darker and more paranoid and ultimately dangerous character. It's just the path that she has to take given the circumstances that she finds herself in. And I kind of feel like it's meant to be tragic but also liberating, and it's not necessarily meant to be that it's coded that one side is good and one side is bad. It's a fascinating like hall of mirrors in many respects.
Yeah, I think it's very complicated because, like, on the one hand, as she gets more and more, as she embraces, the Black Swan more and more, she does feel more liberated. And there's a lot of things that, she like, I was cheering when she says, "I'm moving out." It's like, oh, thank God. But on the other hand, there's something very destructive as well about the path that she's going down. So I don't think it's like one or the other. I think it's a very complicated portrayal, and one would have hoped that maybe this movie could have ended with her getting some help, and maybe she could find a happy medium. And then do what's best for her. It doesn't work out that way. But the film is working with being a parallel of the of the Swan Lake story, and but it's certainly much more complicated than the only way out of this is for her to kill herself, and it's not that, but yeah, I really just there's an alternate reality version of the story in my head where where things end better for Nina, and and she gets to go off and live a truly liberated life.
Yeah, where she and Lily run off to San Francisco together. That would be
Yeah.
the version of the story that was more of the triumphant version, as opposed to the very bittersweet ending that we get here.
I would like to joke that maybe she gets rushed off to the hospital and she's okay. but that wouldn't quite line up with the story of Swan Lake. So
no, I don't think
so. But yeah, but again, going back, like what's so great about this movie is how the complexity of all the different layers and stuff. So, you know, I was talking about that in reference to sort of our perception of the reality of what's actually happening, but also just in terms of what we're supposed to pull from, the so-called White Swan versus the Black Swan. That's the larger framework of the story and the story of Swan Lake and the lens through which we're viewing this. But Nina is much more complex than that, and then there's more going on than simply the dichotomy of the two. There's a big, huge mixture of qualities of her character, and there's, like I said before, there's certain ways in which the trajectory she takes is a good thing, but then there's not great things. Probably, hallucinating that she was murdering an alternative dark version of herself, who then she further, hallucinates is actually the girl she views as her rival, but really she was stabbing herself. Okay, maybe that's not the healthier aspect of this journey she's on. But there are a lot of ways in which, things you could definitely have viewed as more positive. I think the more, sort of demure, unwilling to speak out version of herself, who we can paint as the White Swan, that was in its own way destructive, because she's in this situation with her mother, regardless of what kind of abuse is going on there. Very clearly is abuse, and the fact that then she opens herself up to the abuse of Tomas as well, and is okay with it because, as she says, he's a genius, and wants to go along with what he says so that she'll get this role. And so I think there's destructive aspects on both sides of her character, as well as positive aspects. And at the end of the day, you just wish you could protect this girl and like clear the path for her so that she could, just, go be her true authentic self, whatever that is, and have a sound, mind and body and all that stuff. But it wouldn't be a tragedy if that was the way the story went.
Yeah, no, all these stories all ultimately often center around the idea of an obsession, and for all of the external forces pressing on Nina and pulling her in different directions and suppressing different aspects of her identity, the one thing that is very clearly hers from the beginning of the movie through to the end of the movie is her obsession with perfection. And that is the aspect of her that does not change, that does not fracture. It becomes, ultimately perhaps corrupted in the service of, this role that she is pursuing obsessively. But it is the thing that as all other aspects of her reality start to slip away, as her relationship with her mother fractures even further, as her, grasp on, her understanding of her relationship with Lily splinters and descends into paranoia, as her relationship with Tomas becomes even more, stilted and destructive. She never lets go of her desire for this role and to achieve the perfection of this role. And it's the thing that ultimately, in many ways, anchors her, but also pulls her down straight to the bottom, of this abyss that she's sinking into, because she can't let it go. It perhaps would have been better for her if she recognized that this isn't worth it. This can't, I shouldn't be doing this. This is a fucked up situation that I need to escape. She never even considers that. It is always, even when her mother, for her own reasons, is basically saying, I don't think you should be pursuing this role anymore. That makes Nina all the more intent on doing it. And it's the thing that allows her to kind of savagely break free from her mother. The whole, a very chilling scene where, from every aspect, when Erica asks, Nina, what happened to my sweet girl? And Nina spits back with an absolutely, tenacious venom. She's gone. And that, again, could feel triumphant if you look at the sense that, the sweet girl was the box that Erica was kind of placing Nina in to kind of keep her as hers. But it also is meant to underscore that there's a tragedy here, that Nina is basically, that doesn't feel like, an affirming statement of, yes, I'm moving beyond you. That it is very much framed as Nina, trying to hurt her mother, and perhaps the way her mother has hurt her, and also basically to say that, I am committed to this path, and I the part of her that has been unlocked now, it will not be caged again, come what may, even if it damns her. And I think that is one of the elements that, even though we see her in the final dance sequence have moments of doubt and of fear and of, going back, she's committed to that final performance, that final, element. And it's telling that, after being so technically precise as the White Swan, she messes up that aspect of the performance during the final sequence. And when it comes time to dance the Black Swan, that is when she is just flawless. And, and you do.
I do want to step back for a moment before I comment on that, and I realized that I may have said something that I didn't intend to say before, which was when I was talking about how sort of both sides of Nina are, potentially destructive. I did not mean to imply, however, that any sort of abuse or whatever that she's going through earlier on in the film is by any means on her at all. Like, it is absolutely not. I'm worried that what I said may have been misconstrued as that. That is absolutely not the case. Just saying that, I was highlighting the fact that the sort of self-assuredness that she comes into later in the film may help her to break away from that.
Yeah.
But absolutely, if anybody, takes that to mean that, that I was saying, she brings anything on herself, that no, absolutely not. So I just wanted to make sure I was clear on that. Moving forward to, I've been waiting for us to get into the discussion about, her performance as the Black Swan, because, oh my God, Natalie Portman is just utterly mesmerizing in these scenes, and, and certainly there's a big part of that that's helped by sort of the makeup and costume design, and especially what they do with her eyes, which is through Nina's perspective, less so what's actually going on with her, and the visual effects that are used to show her, like gradually transforming into a swan. But when she brings herself right up in front of the camera and looks like into it, it's so freaky, but it's like just mesmerizing and stunning, and we feel like the audience and the rest of the company feel, where it's like, wow, holy shit. um, it's so like, even as we feel that this is all headed towards, tragedy, and at this point we even think that she might have killed Lily potentially. um it, there's still this sort of euphoria of watching, all this, and um especially the way the music is, she's performing against the music, and when she's transforming into a swan, and the way it all crescendos, um when she fully transforms, on stage, and the way the music works with that, it's just I just remember just like holding my breath and watching this in the theater, and it was just so amazing. There's also this great moment when she's backstage, and she's just kind of, we know now, having seen the whole movie, that she's terribly injured at this point, but she's just kind of going through it, and she's out of her head, and the way Natalie Portman kind of sways her head, and then you see the transformation on her arm, and stuff, and it's almost like she's high on a drug, basically. And it's so incredible to watch. Like, her performance just goes to another level in these final sequences.
Yeah, no, I mean, this scene is the reason that Natalie Portman won the Oscar. Everything that led up to this sets the ground for this development, for this, performance, which is very much transformational, as you say, in more aspects than one, both in terms of the visual elements of, Nina hallucinating herself, transforming into a swan, but the fact that just the way that Natalie Portman carries herself in the scene, the way that she is, the way that she moves, the way that she modulates the intensity of her stage, as Cassie says, very much she commands in this scene. This is her moment, and she seizes it with a ferocity and a single-minded committedness that we had perhaps not believed Nina to be capable of up until now. And then from the moment, once we see it, it is clear that this was always in her. And she is reveling in this. Even as you said, she is gravely injured, even though she is wondering if perhaps she may have killed somebody, even if, her world is in many respects falling apart. She just is euphoric. This is probably the best moment of her entire life. And, we see that on stage, but also I'm glad that you highlighted the moment when there's kind of an intermission in the performance where she goes, she exits the stage and is kind of waiting for her moment to return. And as she's kind of sitting there and standing there in the dark red light, she is just kind of moving in this very eerie and almost inhuman way, and then like embracing the fact that she's envisioning her skin transforming into feathers at this point, and it doesn't seem to disturb her at all. She seems to relish it.
And then there's this smile that comes over her face, this really creepy, disturbing smile just before she goes back out on the stage. And it's like, like, this is all like really dark, disturbing stuff, but it's thrilling to watch. And yeah, and what's I think is important about, I'm talked about earlier about one of the few times we sort of get a cut to the sort of real world is after she's fully transformed on stage and the music crescendos, and then we cut to the audience's point of view and we see Nina as she actually is. It's actually really good because it grounds the scene in showing that no, she actually like did like knocked it out of the park, and everybody's, really responding to it. Because I think it's important in that moment to get sort of an outside view of it, so that we know sort of, what's, at least in that moment, that that the performance she's giving at least is real, and that's how it's being received. But then of course she goes backstage, and you know and is preparing for the next part, when she returns to being the White Swan, and then has a knock at the door, finds that it's Lily. Actually speechless, and then we find out that part of the scene where she it is shown to have been killing Lily, like a large part of that didn't transpire, but she did break the glass, and then she stabbed herself as a way of killing a part of her. And and then she just resigns to her fate, because she knows what's coming, and the only thing left is to finish the performance and achieve that perfection that she's been after. And it's just so damn sad and horrifying. Yeah, but breathtaking cinematically, especially that last bit of the performance, like when she leaps off and we get that shot of her falling down. It's like, yeah. I don't like necessarily to feel terribly sad and gut punched, but when it's done so well, it's remarkable.
Yeah, this may be a good opportunity to shout out the cinematographer Matthew Libatique, who was Oscar nominated, rightly so, for this for his work on this movie. I know he has somewhat of a controversial reputation in Hollywood, but his work is quite often brilliant. I also love his also Oscar nominated work on A Star Is Born. But this, like, the way that he moves the camera in this final dance sequence, it helps and not like complement and enhance Natalie Portman's performance, because this movie was made famously, and I saw this in the behind the scenes doc. This movie had a budget of $13 million, which is not large for a movie like this. Which meant that they had to be very judicious in how they captured, the aspects of the set and the actors. They could not waste a single moment. And this sequence has no wasted moments. It's the camera feels like thrillingly alive in the scene. It is very much Natalie Portman as Odile is seducing us in this sequence, and the camera does the work of capturing that movement. While Natalie Portman didn't do every aspect of the ballet dancer dancing during this movie, she did all these hero shots, and she feels like she is thoroughly in command, as Cassie had alluded to earlier. And in these sequences,
one of my most eye-rolling things was like during the award season and after she won the Oscar, when they released like a visual effects reel of the movie and showed certain moments, like in the beginning of the film and at other moments, that they were combining like a real ballet dancer with her work. And there were some Academy members who were like, I thought she learned to do all of that by herself. I wouldn't have voted for her if so. It's like, really? You thought that this, you thought that an actress who, yes, had done, ballet when she was younger, that all of a sudden transformed into master classman of a ballet dancer. It's like, if you thought that, you're the idiot.
Yeah.
No, she got this because she did do a lot of the work, what she was able to, and her performance is what was Oscar worthy. So I remember I hated reading that kind of stuff. It's
Yeah.
yeah, reminds me of what I hate about all the awards hubbub. But but yeah, no, it's what she did was absolutely amazing. And speaking on the cinematography, I do want to mention this film was shot on Super 16 millimeter, and is a case study as to why film is still like so much greater than digital, because like this movie has such an amazing look to it that maybe you can get close to like faking on digital, but it's not going to be as good. This film looks absolutely amazing, and in a way that only film can look. And so I'm just so glad this movie was done at sort of you know the tail end of when shooting on film was still kind of the norm, and not just for Christopher Nolan and Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's called the magic of movies for a reason. It is in many respects what we are seeing is an illusion, but the camera still has to capture certain elements of what's real. And what's very real in this scene is Natalie Portman's performance, and all the visual elements of the costumes and the makeup and the lighting that make it feel unreal in many respects. This is why it's one of the such a brilliant sequence, is because artists knew how to take what was plain and make it into something that feels like otherworldly. And Natalie Portman, from the moment, this is her triumphant moment, but I do feel that the sequence that you alluded to in the aftermath of her triumph, it's to know that she kind of gets her victory, as weird as it is to say, over Thomas, when after her performance she goes straight up to him and kisses him on the mouth. And while part of you is like, ooh, don't do that, it very much is presented as, it's not presented as like a sexual or romantic thing. It is her essentially asserting her power in that moment, for better or ill, and very much putting him in his place. But then we see that there is still that vulnerable and scared, woman in her. Even she has not completely lost it, because when she realizes that she has stabbed herself, and she realizes that it is probably a fatal wound, that is one of the most heartbreaking aspects of the entire movie. The camera kind of just sits with Natalie Portman in that moment and shows her devastation, because this was not her intention. She did, unlike the Swan Queen, she did not intend to kill herself during this performance. It happened in a moment of like psychotic break. And we see her reckon with that, with the certainty of the fact that she is probably going to die. But then she calms herself and sits down and starts putting on the makeup, and you realizes that this, it is her intention to go out there and very literally leave it all on stage. And it's one of the best aspects of her entire performance in this movie.
Yeah, and no, I like sort of the 1-2 punch of that kiss with Tomas, because that's her exerting power over him. But he's elated because he thinks, oh, this is the beginning of a whole new chapter, and this is going to be great for me. And the movie ends with that very much not being the case that this was not about you. Uh, this is about Nina. This is about her, and she's about to like uh, you know, her final moments are about claiming a victory for herself, even as it ends in tragedy. And might I also add, sticking Tomas with a horrible, terrible controversy that he will probably, it's hard to imagine him overcoming. So there's a bit of, you know, you know, that he deserves whatever's coming, his way there, which hopefully, it would be bad things, but I don't know. Um, Fingers crossed for that. But just the closing moments of this, when she says, I felt it. What? Perfect. It was perfect. And then fade to white. It's just, yeah, it's like the whole thing is so sad and tragic and heartbreaking, but also strangely triumphant, and just there's no, like, I'm trying to think, there's not many better mic drops for the final line of a movie.
Yeah, no,
And yeah.
we've talked about, some of our all-time favorite, final lines in movies in recent weeks. And this is a pretty damn good one. It is, in many, not to put a too fine a point on it, but it is very much a perfect final choice of where to leave this movie. This feels like the kind of ending that it's like there was never any other way for the movie to end but here. And Nina's, as she's lying there bleeding and dying, but very much feels at peace in a kind of dark and twisted way with the outcome at this point. Um, this is where, the audience can bring their own perspective into, is this a triumph or is this a tragedy? Is it both? I kind of think it is meant to be both. Not that we ever want it to be, what effectively became kind of an inadvertent suicide to be framed as a triumph. But this is very much Nina having, like the Swan Queen, achieved her freedom, because she got this final moment of unambiguous perfection. And it really is this is like an epitome of what I would consider to be like a darkly beautiful ending. Even though it ends with a fade to white, which again I think is a very appropriate final choice as opposed to a more traditional fade to black. This is Nina's apotheosis, for better or for ill. She was forever changed. It was a change she ultimately did not survive. And but she was perfect in that final sequence, as was Natalie Portman's performance in showing us that.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very heightened story, and a sort of dark, disturbing fairy tale almost, in the same way that something like Pan's Labyrinth is also a quote unquote fairy tale for grown-ups, as Roger Ebert coined it, and so like we shouldn't take this as advice to live by. This
No.
is a triumphant ending. No, absolutely not. It's horrifying and it's tragic, but within the context of the heightened story that we're getting, it's you can view the ending as a triumph for the character of Nina, even as it's like horribly tragic. It's both. So yeah, it's, and what a harrowing experience to go through as an audience member. There's a reason why I said I don't watch the movie that often, but when I do, it's it's always a powerful experience, and like, and watching Natalie Portman's performance is just like this is one of the great performances, and I'll always be glad that this actually did win her, an Academy Award, and she's had some really good ones. I cited before that I'm a huge fan of her work in Closer, and also her work in Jackie is superlative, and she's due for another one in my opinion. Although I would say it's Kira's time up, up there, but I'll be wishing for that for forever. So hopefully that one won't take too long. But yeah, no, I absolutely love this film. I think it's one of the most sort of darkly twisted, movies I've ever seen, but also it's beautiful and just it's this, as much as this is a story about a sort of dichotomy, different sides, the film itself embodies that as well, and it's part of why I love it so much.
Absolutely.
All right. Any other comments about it as we wrap up?
I mean, I'll just shout out a couple of the performers who we didn't, really touch on. I will note the choreographer of this movie, Benjamin Millipede, who has a role as the Prince / David. Became, he became Natalie Portman's husband after this movie. They are no longer together, and
he can go to hell.
It seems like it's probably his fault, but again, separating art from artists. They were married for over a decade, but I would say that I'm not an expert in ballet choreography by any means, but the work is superb, obviously.
His work is good, but I'll say this: if the significant others of of Natalie Portman and Miss Keira Knightley, like it's enough of an ask for me to not hate their guts, just on a general level. But you at least got to be a good guy and treat them well. And it seems like Keira seems to be in a good, healthy relationship. This dude, he can go to hell and and every other thing.
No, I mean, not indulging in tabloid rumors, but if you're going to cheat on Natalie Portman, I don't have a high opinion of your intelligence. On a happier note, young Sebastian Stan pops up in the movie. This is
I was watching that and I was like, "Fucky," because I never noticed that before.
Yeah, in one of the funnier scenes in the movie when Willie and Nina are being they're out to dinner with these two guys, and Willie is kind of giving them shit and calling them Tom and Jerry, even though the guy though his name is actually Andrew, and her teasing that they might be a gay couple, and he's like, I've never been to ballet, and I've never even seen a ballet. And she's like, oh, then you're definitely not gay, which again is stereotypical, but it's for these purposes, it's fine. And obviously he's not a huge important role in any respect, but this was right before he broke big. He would be in Captain America: The First Avenger the next year, so it's one of those things where like I had forgotten he was in this movie, and when he popped up, I was like, hey, Sebastian Stan.
I was like, Thor is gonna have some words for the Winter Soldier. That's
And
which
also
by the way, I will say that I so that I could rep Natalie today, I was wearing my shirt of the Mighty Thor. Nice. Which hashtag my Thor.
And also shout out even though it's a very small role, Mark Margolis, who many people will recognize from his role on Breaking Bad, among others, in a long and illustrious career. He sadly passed away last year, but he just plays one of the patrons, and does not seem to be the greatest guy, but always a pleasure to see him on screen as well.
Yeah, no, his like I'll forgive him, for most things because of his role in Breaking Bad, even though he's he's not exactly a good person in that show, but he does have a very cool, way that he exits the stage in that show. So. Which, and of course, he did also come back for Better Call Saul, which I still have to finish watching. I have many of our friends online who would say that I've committed a sin by not finishing Better Call Saul yet. But I will find a way to get to it soon. And I know that Cassie was very happy about as Veronica Ksenia Solo. I'm not familiar with her, but I know Cassie. Sent me a message after she started watching the movie because she was very excited to see her. So I don't know what else was she in, Cassie, that we'd be able to shout out, because I'm only familiar with her from this film. But yeah, a lot of actors who, lesser known actors who really did a great job in their parts. And yeah, no, I just, yeah, the cast across the board was great. And I will say again on the subject of Winona Ryder, I do find it kind of funny, just because obviously there's all the jokes about Natalie Portman and Keira Knightley looking similar, which is fed by the whole Star Wars thing. And I just remember coming out of Pride and Prejudice back in the day when my mom and I went to go see it, and she had gone through the entire movie believing that it was Winona Ryder playing Elizabeth Bennet. So I always find it kind of funny that Winona Ryder is in this with Natalie Portman, and it's like, why wasn't Keira in it to finish the trifecta?
Yeah, no, and it is notable that Winona Ryder. Yeah, I do remember her from Orphan Black, actually. I didn't finish the series, but I do remember getting to it.
It's another show that I have never gotten around to seeing, so I'll add it to the pile a mile high of shows that I need to get to watching.
Yeah, no, but I just to loop back on the Winona Ryder, obviously she had her heyday with in the late 80s, early 90s with Beetlejuice and Heathers and Edward Scissorhands and Age of Innocence, which was kind of a very she's an all-star in that era. But then she'd kind of had a career lull for many different reasons. And this was pre her renaissance with Stranger Things, so I remember being very pleased when she popped up the previous year in the 2009 Star Trek in a small role, and then in this one as well. I was like, Winona Ryder, bring her back, and she is indeed back now.
Of all the, I will say, of all the parts that I would have guessed for her playing Spock's mother would not have been one.
She's
them,
great. She's great in it.
Yeah. Yeah, if anything, it's just a shame that we didn't get more of her. But yeah, yeah, I guess that's about it. Just an absolutely amazing film that I'm so glad we got to talk about. So just so I could revisit it, if nothing else. And like I said, it does feel very fitting that we talked about this week, and then next week we get to switch over to Kira and Anna Karenina, which is also a very uplifting story.
Yes, we are on a little bit of a dark and tragic kick right now with so we'll find something happier at some to revisit sooner rather than later. But for now, we're gonna Natalie and Kira, always joined in our hearts and on our screens. I think it's fitting that we move to a Nights of Kira stream next.
What was it? I remember there was an interview with Kira where she said that, I forget which movie it was for, but she said she wanted to switch things up because for a couple of years she had started a bunch of things where she just kept dying tragically. And she wanted to switch gears. So, yeah. Spoiler alert. If you haven't seen Anna Karenina, I feel like that's a pretty, not everybody's read it, but everybody kind of knows that it's not a story that ends very happily.
Yeah, I mean, yes, spoilers, but for God's sakes, it's an 18th century Russian piece of Russian literature that's pretty synonymous with tragedy. I don't think it's spoiling much to say that it doesn't exactly have a happy ending.
But yeah, no, I hope you'll watch it for next week, Cass. We love having you in these chats with us, even though it does mean we'll put you through the emotional ringer next week as well. Yeah, so I guess that wraps up. Just again, as we just mentioned, next week we'll be talking about Anna Karenina, and yeah, I feel like it's overdue. It's been a while since we did a Nights of Kira stream. We did Atonement, which another sad one, but that feels like that wasn't like, because Kira's in that, but it's sort of an ensemble piece where she's not really the main character. The character Bryony is the central figure in that film. So this feels like it's a proper, we'll get to devote more time to Kira herself on this one. Well, maybe for other reasons I should, but not for that reason.
No.
But yeah. Yeah, so I guess that's it. Thank you so much, Cassie, for joining us, and for everybody else who tuned in, and anybody else who watches this. This worked last time, so I will just say, if you're watching this and you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so. We did finally cross 400 viewers, which I was very happy about, because the channel's been stuck in the 300s for feels like a couple of years now. So it was nice to finally cross 400. Obviously, we're not doing this for the views. There's a lot of different things we would do on this channel if we were interested in getting more subscribers. Really, it's just about us having fun with our friends. So yeah, but it was still nice to cross that number. It made me feel good.
Yeah,
and
we do sincerely appreciate it. Everyone who, whether you come and just watch one video, or if you're a regular participant in our chats, like Cassie, thank you for being part of our little corner of joy in the celebration of film.
Yeah, and we didn't have the one and only Tinkerbell joining us tonight because because she didn't have 4 hours to set aside. But you were right, Jared. We were able to contain this one where at roughly 2.5 hours, which I think is good.
Yeah.
This is like the length of a normal stream should be. But yeah. So as for anything else, just yeah, no, it's I'm getting really excited about we mentioned earlier we're still in the midst of the season 2 of the Rings of Power. I'm really excited about the next episode of that. Hoping we swing back over to see some more of Tom, because I really love the bit we got of him in episode 4. And what else do I have coming up show wise? I guess I've just been watching, catching up on some shows. But yeah. I will say, following up on what I just said about the Lord of the Rings, I want to say, like, it's such a I know this may feel like it's because we're not going to be talking about it for a couple of weeks that I do want to say a couple words about it. Just I'm like so deliriously happy that that I get to experience a Lord of the Rings story now, and and sort of an epic story, about the Second Age of Middle Earth. It just feels like something that, years ago I had no concept of something like this ever happening, and I'm just so deliriously happy and thrilled that we get it now. And if other people have a problem with that, you can go to hell. Uh, but thankfully, staying away from social media for the most part has allowed me to not have to, put up with that kind of stuff. And I get to just enjoy the show and talk about it with my friends. But yeah, no, it's I always say that Lord of the Rings is one of the things that brings me, like, sort of brings me back to the light when I'm in a bit of a funk. That's what the books and the original movies always did for me, and I feel like this show does the same. So yeah, I just wanted to say that because it's just I don't think anybody from the show is actually watching this stream, but I really would like to thank everybody from the cast and crew to the showrunners. You guys are gifting me with something that has really lifted my spirits in a big way, and I think that, like you and I talked about this before, Jared, that I think that what's getting lost in all the sort of discourse about the show and all that is that I think that what the show is doing, both in its scope and ambition and in its execution, in my personal opinion, like, I think in years to come, it's really going to be seen as a really important part of the tapestry of Tolkien adaptations and Middle Earth storytelling. And hopefully it won't be too long before some more people get on board with that and realize that. But in the meantime, we get to enjoy it, and yeah, I'm just really thankful for that. That may seem an odd postscript for a stream about Black Swan, but it's the reason why I wanted to do that stream last week about it, because I'm just so, like, I'm just so excited by the show and so happy to have it that I just want to talk about it at every possible opportunity. And since we have to hold on for the rest of our conversation until the series ends, I just needed to say that before we sign off. So
yeah, we have certain touchstones on this channel, and the Lord of the Rings is one, and the Rings of Power is becoming very much a special story told in that world from our perspective, and we hope some of you share that perspective. And if not, that's fine, but just know that it is giving us joy unironically and completely, and we are very much looking forward to celebrating it, today and tomorrow and in a few weeks and going forward for the rest of its 5-season run. Because if there's one streaming show that I feel confident is going to get its full due, it's the one with the Amazon money behind it. So,
speaking of which, I believe that we are known as Amazon shills. So, so when can we expect those checks, Jeff Bezos? Just, I could really use the money. Just saying. Yeah, no, like you'll notice that common thread. Like, I feel like especially the Kira thing. I would be shocked if there's ever a stream that goes by where I don't mention Kira, just at one point or another. And Lord of the Rings is always, it's always not far from my thoughts. I will say, like, I know I drove both my parents crazy throughout the years, because when those movies came out in the early 2000s, I know for a fact they hoped that my obsession with those stories would fade, and pray for them, because that never happened.
And that's just fine. That if we have a trinity of North Stars on this channel, Lord of the Rings, Kira, and I'll hold up the Star Wars corner of that. But ultimately, it's just what makes us happy. So that's what we're gonna do.
By the way, I want to close this out by saying that Ray's theme was performed in outer space. That was a story that ran, and not only does that make me very happy, but I want to send a big middle finger to all the sequel trilogy haters, and in particular the Ray haters and the Daisy Ridley haters. You can suck it. because this is a distinction that I think I don't know if any other film scores have held that distinction, but it feels like a rare one. So yeah. And on that note, we'll go ahead and close out, and maybe I'll go listen to Ray's theme, just to celebrate that. But yeah. We should wrap this up before I start finding a way to ramble on about other things. But I hope everybody who sees this, hope you have a wonderful night or day whenever you're listening to this. And Cassie, thank you again for chatting with us, as well as everybody else who tuned in, whether for the whole thing or just for a minute here and there. We appreciate it. And yeah, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your weekend for the couple hours that are left. And yeah, we'll see you next week. Anyway, that's it. You have some parting words?
I was trying to think about something from this movie, but there's nothing that's going to leave us on that hopeful, uplifting note. So I will simply say adieu.
Good night, everyone. Bye.